Hello, my name is Lloyd Chapman. I'm president and founder of the American Small Business League. I've got something really startling to talk to you about today. Let me start off by showing you something. Let me hold this up. Can they see that? One of the most important challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today is that large businesses are receiving federal small business procurement awards and agency receiving credit for those awards, right?
Yep.
Everybody see that? So that was in 2005. Now that's from the SBA Inspector General. Every SBA Inspector General for a decade has reiterated. I think there's been 3 different SBA Inspector Generals in the last 10 years, maybe 4. And everyone has reiterated every year for a decade the number one problem at the SBA is that large businesses are receiving federal small business procurement awards. In 2009, the GAO investigated the SBA and released report 10108 and said this: by failing to hold firms accountable, the SBA and contracting agencies have sent a message to the contracting community that there's no punishment or consequences for committing fraud. That's a Government Accountability Office report 10108, 2009. So the biggest problem at the SBA for a decade is the diversion of small business contracts to large businesses. In 2009, the GAO, in my opinion, accused the SBA of encouraging people to commit fraud when they said, that they sent a message to the contracting community, there's no punishment or consequences for committing fraud. So here, this is the most amazing thing I've seen. I've been suing the government for 25 years, and this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in all that time. So considering the fact that the agency's number one problem for a decade is the diversion of small business contracts to large businesses, here's a policy the SBA wants to propose. Specifically, the rule proposes to amend the Small Business Administration's program regulations to implement statutory provisions establishing a, you ready? Safe harbor from fraud penalties for individual firms that misrepresent business concerns as being small for the purpose of federal procurement opportunities. Let me say that again. So the federal agency whose job it is to make sure that small businesses get their fair share of government contracts, whose Inspector General has said for a decade the biggest problem is the diversion of small business contracts to large businesses. The Government Accountability Office accused them of encouraging people to commit fraud. They want to implement a policy. Specifically, the rule proposes to amend the Small Business Administration's program regulations to implement statutory provisions to establishing a safe harbor from fraud penalties for individuals or firms that misrepresent business concerns as being small for the purpose of federal procurement opportunities. Sounds to me like they're legalizing fraud. By the way, under Section 16D of the Small Business Act, the penalty for misrepresenting your business as a small business to get small business contracts is the penalty is up to 10 years in prison, up to a $500,000 fine, or both. That's a federal law. So the Small Business Administration is going to try to repeal a federal law establishing a penalty for misrepresenting yourself to illegally receive federal small business contracts of up to 10 years in prison and a $500,000 fine to create a loophole to create a safe harbor from fraud penalties for firms that misrepresent themselves. I think that's the most astonishing thing I've ever seen in my life. And the funny thing is that I think you'll probably notice that the only organization in the country that claims to represent small businesses opposing this is the American Small Business League. You won't see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce opposing it. You won't see the National Federation of Independent Business opposing it. You won't see the National Small Business Association, Women Impacting Public Policy, the Women's Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber. No one but the American Small Business League. So when the SBA tries to create a loophole to legalize felony federal contracting fraud with a penalty of 10 years in prison, no one's going to object but the American Small Business League. But I hope you'll join me in sending comments to the SBA. They're taking comments until mid-August, is that right? Mid-August. This video is going to be linked to a press release about this where you'll see how you can send in comments. But join us. And by the way, I view this as an attempt by the SBA to repeal the Small Business Act. They're trying to slowly chip away at it. And eliminating penalties for fraud is one way of trying to chip away at the Small Business Act. We don't want fraudulent companies receiving federal small business contracts. We don't want our tax dollars going to companies that are guilty of felony contracting fraud. We want our tax dollars going to legitimate small businesses. So join the American Small Business League in our opposition to the SBA proposed policy to legalize contracting fraud. I'm Lloyd Chapman with American Small Business League. Thank you very much.